we have a long list of other services that were assessed specifically on public safety, specifically on maintenance. So for this presentation, I'm giving you the high level kind of category. But on this survey within maintenance, we had people rate 12 different maintenance services. Within police, we had them rate a dozen different aspects of public safety. Within code enforcement, we had them rate all sorts of aspects of code enforcement. So that's important. You may want to take a look at some of the more details. But for your decision making strategically, I'd stay at the high level. You know, what are the major categories? Otherwise, if you get down into the weeds, next thing you know, you lose sight of what the major priorities are. But clearly, safety, schools, and the economy are something that people care a great deal about. And you'll notice that these are issues for all districts. In other words, this is the importance of safe neighborhoods and low crime rate, dark blue in every district. Good schools, dark blue, every district. And strong, good jobs, strong economy. Those three issues resonate with people in this county across the board. So knowing what people care about from a kind of a quality of life perspective, putting that into context with your service delivery issues, I think is one of the big challenges you all as leaders. I'm glad I don't have to do your job. I can just tell you, here's the priorities, here are the people think. You get to come up with the course of action. But hopefully you'll be able to use this information to set some priorities as you move forward, come to consensus on some of the issues that really are the issues that residents want you to address. But obviously there will be individual differences that you'll have to recognize based on the people that you actually serve. And with that, this brings us back to the conclusions that I showed you at the beginning. You're definitely moving in the right direction. I hope you celebrate in that. Oftentimes people spend so much time focusing on all the problems and all the things that you haven't done, and you do have a ways to go. But you've done a great job as a community over the last 15 years, so celebrate that. I mean, you've done tremendous. The image has gone from 19% to 44%. And yeah, it needs to be around 70, but you're doing a lot of the right things. These are your priorities for city services. Those are your top priorities for county services. And I think as you address them, take into consideration, what is it going to take to get people to want to stay here long time or over time? Because if people start staying here and they want to build for the future, they'll start reinvesting in their businesses, they'll reinvest in their homes, they'll have their kids come back, and that's the kind of community that you really want to have. And that'll be a vibrant community that then helps you build that brand equity where people, when they think of Wyandotte County Unified Government, they in and of themselves think, wow, that's a great organization. When people think of this organization as a great organization, you'll be able to persevere difficult times fairly easily because people won't blame you for the mistake. They'll compliment you for the fact that 99% of the time you do things right. And most residents do have a pretty good impression of your services today. So I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything, but it's been a pleasure to be able to share this with you today. Yeah.
Do you ever use the results of a survey like this to recommend that governments de-emphasize certain services?
Absolutely, and yeah, it's one of the tough decisions you have to make. A good example is, you know, that important satisfaction chart. I'll go back here. This is one of the ways it can be used. No one ever, you know, staff with the areas over here never like to hear it. But what happens is Arlington County, a great example. Recession hits in 2008. They got to figure out where to cut a few $1 million. So they can cut it off streets, they can cut it off code enforcements, or they might be able to shut libraries down on Sundays and reduce library hours. Well, for library patrons, that was terrible. And they had a lot of outcry, but they decided based on their priorities, libraries was way up here. All right? So in other words, less important, extremely high levels of satisfaction. And so one of the issues is, in fact, this is probably even a little better to see in your street diagram because they're a little more, you'll see here, ambulance service, fire service, recycling, you know, those things are less important to folks right now. Anytime it comes to things like fire and ambulance, that drives people crazy if you reduce the investment there. But sometimes there's a lot of dollars there. And so you have to decide at what level of service are you really willing to pay for. And do you have $3 million there that could go over here to one of these items? And so in Arlington County's case, they looked at their library system, and that was exactly what they did, is they cut libraries, and they had a lot of people upset about that. And so for 2 years, they heard what a terrible decision that was. And when I came back and did their next survey, guess what? Satisfaction of libraries went down. Not a big surprise. Libraries went from being way up here to about over here. But their overall satisfaction rating went up. And the reason for that is they were able to put money into things that people cared the most about. So at the end of the day, If you try to manage satisfaction for every service individually, and you say we're never letting any rating go down, you really can't change the way you do business. You know, the city of Olathe, which is where we're based, we work with them a lot. And if you're familiar with Olathe's transformation over the last 15 years, it's been amazing. Olathe had one of the worst traffic flow problems in the country 15 years ago. In fact, they had over 50% of their residents give negative, dissatisfied ratings on their survey in 2000. You would have thought, how do you ever, the costs of doing that? So what the city of Olathe did is said, you know what, we're not going to take any of our general fund money, our general fund capital improvement dollars and spend them on parks. We're not putting them in any of the areas, but we're going to basically put 99% of our dollars in traffic flow improvements. So they raised their railroad, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, 2 new interchanges, put in all sorts of roundabouts on major arterials. That's about all Olathe spent their money on over the last decade. When I presented their results yesterday morning to their city employees, dissatisfaction with traffic flow has gone from 52% to just 14%. That was the number one issue. It's no longer the number one issue. But because the city took on the issue bravely, that was, councils had been afraid to do that for years. Nobody wanted to say, hey, let's put $50 million into raising the railroad in the middle of town. But people's quality of life has changed. It used to be you had to leave 15 minutes before your soccer game because you weren't sure if a train was going to come by. Now people move in, but that's a kind of situation where they took hits on public safety. They took hits in parks and recreation. They took hits in other areas to address the big issue. And they got unanimous consent on their leadership to do that, and it was really difficult in those first few years, but it's paid off tremendously. And now that they got the confidence in that, they've been able to pass a tax for parks and recreation. So now they didn't have to have extra money for parks because people thought, hey, we're putting money into I care more about traffic flow, so I'll pay more for parks. So now there's a dedicated sales tax for parks and recreation. They said, hey, I want to put more in expansion of traffic flow. So just this fall, they passed a tax for maintenance of streets. So they now have 2 sales taxes that residents have voted for because they had confidence in the way the cities used the dollars. And that's the tough things, is sometimes you do have to decrease funding in some areas, take the negative hits that you're going to get in the short term to accomplish big long-term objectives that are going to cost a lot of money to do. So you're right on target with that observation. Yeah.
Thank you. I have another question, and it occurred to me when you talked about the question about whether this is a good place to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you could have a conversation about whether that should be a goal. But when you said the number one, or one of the things that factored into that was services for aging and things like that, that was not the first thing that occurred to me as important for someone who is retiring.
Yeah, and that you may be right on target. I'm just looking at your data, so I only have a limited set of questions. So I see a relationship with people who were less satisfied with this and those who placed a priority on aging services. So there probably is some relationship, but that's the only question I have on the survey to really interpret that based on. But there's probably a number of other factors as well. So I wouldn't, if I gave the impression that I was limiting to just that, that certainly wasn't my intent.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could speak, Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Maddox.
Okay, I wanted to thank Chris. I think that's the presenter's name, and I appreciate the data from the ETC Institute. As I listened to Chris speak, I heard him speak about the people who show up to the meetings. They either fit into the category of the don't like or the ones who have new ideas. And so I'm just under the belief that many of the people who I've received feedback from are a part of the don't likes. And so I felt compelled to say this because I do not know how the lottery choices were decided based on residents who received surveys. So the people that I hear, according to the 4th district, are somewhat troubled and dissatisfied with safety. We've got shootouts going on during the day. We've got police chases that are happening in the streets, and people are, being innocent bystanders. And we've got code that's a big issue. We got dilapidated homes and neglect of vacant lots. We have a lot of things. And so when you mention that across the county the satisfaction is equal, or that people are somewhat okay, that's troubling to me because those are some issues that stick out. You know, people are concerned about Parks and Rec and its services for the young people. So we have a lot of different issues. When I hear about the people that are there, I contacted a lot of people and told them they need to be here because as we move forward with the new county administrator and new elected officials, that's a concern for people in my district. I appreciate what the ETC Institute came up with based on their lottery distribution, but those are things that I wanted to mention. I'm not there today, but I did want to mention them to my fellow colleagues so they understood what the fourth district is concerned about.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't want to give the impression that having public meetings isn't important. So if that was something that folks thought here, I think they're extremely important. I've been very involved in those processes. But the people who tend to come out are ones who are engaged. And so this is a survey to balance that. And just for the commissioner who's on the phone, if you take a look at it, you mentioned police services and code enforcement. Those are in your top 3 issues. Parks is not in the top 3 for District 4, but I think the survey results very closely mirror what you just mentioned is what your observed priorities are for your district. Police services, code enforcement, and maintenance of streets. What happens is maintenance of streets is an area that impacts lots of services, your infrastructure. But I've seen over the last 15 years, it's typically the area that's easiest to cut money from in the short term to shore up everything else. And what happens is you decide not to do the overlays, not to do the repairs, to make sure every other services continues to be funded. But over time, the decaying roads, the decaying neighborhoods, all those then feed up to other issues, code enforcement, police services. And that's why I'd encourage you to look at other places that have used maintenance investments as a strategy to help bolster code enforcement and public safety perceptions. Because if you only use police, but you never address the issues of what the community infrastructure looks like, people may never feel better just because there's more police on the streets. And so there's a lot of complicated issues that you'll have to discuss. But as far as the lottery selection, I think you're addressing the random selection process. The way we did that is every residential household in this county was eligible to be selected. We picked a random sampling of approximately 500 per district to get the survey. And so we essentially, everyone had the equal probability of being selected, and that's the key. If we just said, hey, let's see who the first 500 people are that respond, we'd probably get the same information you'd hear at your public meetings. But we did a very intentional process, and one way to ensure that the data is good is to look at, does it represent the demographics of the community, and that's one of the reasons I was emphasizing that up front. But Commissioner, on the phone, you're right on target with some of your observations. Police and code enforcement are definitely 2 of the top issues that you're looking at.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Maddox.
I just said thank you.
Okay.
Oh, well, you're welcome.
Of the dissatisfied people with the traffic flow in Olathe, I'm sure it's about the roundabouts.
I think he cited that as the improvement, raise the satisfaction.
I'm really sure they don't work. A question, though. You surveyed 1,200 people, and to me, that doesn't seem like a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's just the common answer. I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, but to put things in perspective, when you're doing statistical sampling, once a universe or the total population gets to be about 3,000 or 4,000, it's almost equivalent to what we call an infinite universe. So in other words, if you want to do a random sample of people in the United States that has over 300 million, you could survey about 400, and you'd get results that are about plus or minus 5% at the 95% level of confidence. In a community that has 150,000, you have to do about 400. In a community of 500, or 5,000, you have to do about 400. It's just the science of statistical sampling, the way that works out. And I know a lot of times it doesn't seem like a lot, but in the reality, it's a very good indicator of what you're doing. And you can spend more money, and I love to help people spend more money. You could survey 10,000 folks, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, the results would not be any different.
Well, what seems strange for District 5 is there was more people, it looked like, responded to east of 435 than west of 435, and I would have thought it would have been in reverse.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'd have to take a look at the distribution of your population. Typically it mirrors,
I think
yeah.
I have that
Oh, you
answer,
do?
believe it or not. Mike, I think it's the density.
Oh,
It
right.
just looks that way because your people are more spread out.
Yeah.
And like, if he goes back to that
Yeah.
screen, you see a lot of dots like on top of each other, that's because we're close together.
Yeah, if you take a look at that, and usually what happens is this map,
I'm
if I
guessing
do an
that's what it
overlay
is.
with your, if I do an overlay with the density of your population, there's actually, I don't know where your district boundary, so maybe this is a better map that shows it. So this is your district, so here's 435. There's more people, you're looking at, there's more dots over here, but they're spread out. Is that, I guess, I'm not sure, is that your district or is it?
District 5's the top one. It's
the
the,
top one.
it's the really good, it's the pearl.
Yeah, same, yeah, the ugly purple one. So you have a lot of dots on that side as well. Those are more densely populated, but, you know, it looks like to me, I can't count them all up just looking at that, but it does give you, you have both sides well represented if you're looking at 435. If you're just to count them up, you probably have about at least half on each side, so.
Yeah, but if you overlaid, and like Mike Grimm might be able to help you with this, if you overlaid a population map, I bet the density of population would match to where the dots are, if that makes sense.
Like
That's
where the
typically what we see.
subdivisions are, You probably can figure
Right.
that out, 'cause you know your district.
But let me go back to your science piece, though. What happens is these are great for the county as a whole, okay? But at your district level, we only have 150 respondents. So now the precision is no longer plus or minus 3% at your district. It's now more around plus or minus 8% or so. So you see what I mean? And then if you were to look at, and breaking it down into two areas and had 70 from each side, now your precision's no longer even at the 95% level of confidence. It's now at the 90%. And now it's more like plus or minus 10. And so part of it is as you break the county down and you have smaller numbers of representative respondents, your accuracy diminishes. So when you're looking county-wide, this is an extremely representative sample. For each of your districts, the data is accurate, but if you then try to work within your districts, that would take the data beyond its ability. You'd probably have to do about 200 surveys or more just to be able to break your data down, so you at least have perhaps two different areas within a district. But for your county level, it's extremely accurate, yeah.
Important question.
Uh-huh.
And I think this is good for the future, and I don't know why my microphone keeps cutting in and out. But if there's a, for future surveys, if we wanted to be able to leverage it both for countywide and district information that each commissioner could use, would you recommend ramping up the sampling size and to what level?
Again, it's a matter of resources. To give you an example, Kansas City, Missouri does over 4,000 surveys, a much larger community, but they want to make sure that each of their districts has a significant sample. In other places, Olathe does 2,000 a year. You know, it's a comparable size population. But you have a lot of districts, though. And so the tough thing is it's the number of surveys you're doing per district. You'd probably want to do, if you're trying to look within just your overall district, 150 is fine. You know, if you just care what your overall district number is, what you see here is on target. But if you're trying to look at differences within your district, you would have to increase the
So
sample size.
if we have basically 20,000 people per district, if we were just doing a single district, what sample size would you recommend?
Pretty much 400.
400. So if we wanted to do that level countywide, 400 times 8
Right.
would be 4,800. Is that right?
3,200.
Saturday. Which would be roughly almost 3 times the sample size.
Yeah, almost 3 times the sample size, and,
Can I get a new micro? Can I get a?
Well, if I could, you know, when we did this, we added this survey late in the fiscal year,
right.
and it was a late add, and we had established a rough budget that we were going to look at. And we had the opportunity, when ETC presented their proposal, to get a much higher sampling rate, but it came at a much higher cost. So my hope is that we are going to continue this on a routine and periodic basis with this as an overall baseline. Now, if we can plan for it the next time, we can spend more money on it the next time, we can get higher sampling densities in each of our districts.
Yeah, and I would just my experience, because I don't like, we have good clients when you tell them not to spend too much, and so part of it is digest the data you have now. You'll be getting a full report in the next week or so that we'll have, and if that's enough for you as commissioners, you might be okay with where you're at now, but if you say, you know what, I really need more data, I need to understand differences between East and West 435, and you find yourself in that position, then but that way you would kind of know to spend more or not. And so that way you get the best value of your investment over time.
Thanks, Mayor. So I just, first of all, this is fantastic. I love it. I think it gives us overall very general direction. And as far as I'm concerned, you could take this and we could leave for the rest of the day and just give it to staff and let them do their thing. Because I think it's great direction. However, I do have a couple of questions. One, this government over the last 7 years has spent an enormous amount of time on improving infrastructure in the way of curb and sidewalk. I didn't see any information or data in regard to curb and sidewalk.
Yeah, actually, what I didn't break down for you, and this is where you'll start seeing differences by district, is on maintenance as a section, we have probably 12 or 14 questions about sidewalks, neighborhood streets, appearance of, so you'll be able to break this down.
You do
to
have
much-
that data.
There is. For today's, it would have taken me
Okay.
probably 2 or 3 hours to go through all the data.
Okay, so I'm very grateful
Right.
for that, because we have done a lot of work on that particular thing. And just as a comment, I'm glad it's going to be an ongoing thing. I thought the commission gave pretty clear direction when we brought the survey idea up, that I think the frustration that the commission might experience is this is great information, and so let's say streets is a priority all over the place, but what is difficult is to let the community drive where those improvements take place first if you don't have that drill down data. And I think it's helpful, though it's great to have engineers determine, what roads need to be done first. Personally, sometimes I think people driving the road are a better judge of what should be a priority. So I'm a little frustrated with the sample size, and I can get over that. I mean, as long as it's going to get bigger if we do this again. And I think, because I did a survey with you all just in my district in 7, and I noticed I was the one that was the most concerned about the sample survey, because you took 6,000, you sent 6,000 surveys just in my district alone. And I know every detail. I know by block who's happy with their street and who's not. And so it's very easy for me to give staff very clear direction about what's important in my district. So I think this is a great start. I'm not trying to be negative. I do think that as the commissioners go through it, there'll be a little frustration that it's still a big geographic area to determine where to put the limited amount of money that we do have, in particular with the streets and the way that we're currently structured, where commissioners have a lot of say about that.
And I might just add what you will be getting that I didn't present today, because I just kind of did your high-level county and your high-level city services. You actually are going to get this type of data for maintenance, and it will have neighborhood streets and snow removal and sidewalks, and you're actually going to be able to see the priorities within
Have the
maintenance.
shaded map.
You're going to have the shaded maps for all the services. You're going to have that for code enforcement. You're going to be able to look where litter is a problem, where excess signage is a problem, where abandoned vehicles are a problem. And you're going to have this type of chart for code enforcement. You're going to have this kind of chart for public safety services. You can find out where visibility of police. So there's a lot of detail for this meeting, since you're working kind of strategically. Didn't roll that out, but we have over 100 maps. So you'll be able to see district by district, not just these high-level things, but what are the maintenance issues by district? What are the code enforcement issues? So there's a lot of data that you'll be able to tap into.
Can you tell me, again, remind me, I know you've talked to this, what's the validity again of that district by district data?
About plus or minus 8%, more or less, at the
Okay,
district level. Oh, sorry. Is it?
Use a different term. I don't really get that.
If you see a result that's 50%, it's somewhere between 42 and 58%. So it's accurate. So now, well, what it means is that, not to do a statistic class, but this is kind of an easy way. When you hear the 95% level of confidence, what that means is that if you did the survey 100 times, 95 times out of 100, you'd expect to get the same result within whatever that margin of error is. So for your overall survey, if we did the survey 100 times the same way, we'd get the same results within about plus or minus 2.8%. If we did it the same way for your districts, 95% of the time, we'd get the same results within about 8%. So if you see for your district 42, it might be somewhere between 30, low 30s and upper, 50. So there's a bigger range. But when you actually start stacking up the priorities, it's a little bit different, because as you go to 100, I don't want to get people too lost in the weeds on this, but as you go, the margin of error is when the result is at the 50% level. So the worst case is plus or minus 2.8 countywide. But as you go to 100, it's actually smaller than that. So in other words, if you're at 99%, it's no longer plus or minus 2.8%. It's more like plus or minus 0.05. So when you see results and 80-some% of the respondents said something, or 12%, there's a much smaller margin of error. So if you're actually looking at certain issues and those numbers are further away from 50%,
And will
the
it
error's
tell us
less.
that? Will it
We
give us-
could. It gets very, I'd be more, if there's something specific you'd like to assess,
Yeah.
otherwise, yeah.
I could see that. But
Yeah.
if there was one specific issue that you
Sure.
were working on that you were gonna put
Absolutely.
some
We'd be able to
emphasis
pull that.
on.
Otherwise, you could have just piles and piles
Right,
of data.
you could
Right.
say, hey, this is
Yeah.
about 90%
Right.
accurate.
Yeah,
You know,
we
9
can-
out of 10 people are saying this is the
Yeah.
direction to go in this area.
Yeah, if you wanted to double check and just say, well, what's the actual margin of error for this specific question, we can let you know. In fact, your statistics, I know Lou probably can do that without thinking. You know, Mike's probably the same way. Some of those things come right off because it's just a function of the sample size and the distribution of the answers.
And when will we get these, when will we get this survey in its entirety?
We'll probably have that for you in the next week or so. So we're in the process of just finishing up one part of it we wanted to do is kind of get your feedback. If there's additional things, just like I've heard today, that you want to make sure we have plenty of maps in there. So that's one of the things that when we're all done, you'll have an appendix that probably has over 100 maps based on what I've heard today. So this is my thought was let you see the results, the high level things. If there's issues and additional analysis you want, they can go to Mike or Lou, and then they'll pass them on. And then we'll finalize the report to make sure you have as much as you need.
Okay, thank you.
Test 2 3, test 2 3, test 2 3, test 2 3. What's that? Oh, test 1 2 3. All right, I'm done with microphone number 5. So here, I'll give it, let me give it away. One of the things that's very important is getting these results online. So when will they be available to go online?
I have today the results that I presented to you. There's actually hard copies, so we'll give those out today. Then I would assume that if you want to make the presentation I presented, you have a copy of that electronically.
Absolutely.
And then the full report, like I said, probably about another week, week and a half, and it'll be finished. But that requires kind of a more detailed review of some of those sub-issues.
This is more of the executive summary, is that how you describe this?
Exactly. It's essentially the presentation I gave today, so it'll have those high-level conclusions, some of the maps. But what you're seeing today is actually probably only, at best, half of the questions that were included in the survey. We have questions in there about the reason people are coming to, what's going to keep them, there's a lot of other questions in the survey that you'll probably find interesting that I didn't have a chance to cover.
So we'll work to get this on the online right away on our webpage, so the community can go and dig through this as well. And when we have the complete one, we can put that up. So people who want to, drill down into it can certainly have the opportunity. So that's fantastic. Any other questions for the survey? One of the questions is, how often do many communities do these surveys?
It's based on how equipped you are to use the data. I don't recommend doing it all the time if you're not ready to digest it. Kansas City, Missouri, Olathe do it quarterly. Many communities do it annually, and then other communities do it every 2 years. And so it's really a part, if you do it quarterly, you have to be rolling it out to your managers. Like Olathe does a presentation to 100 managers every quarter. So they see the results, and there's an expectation if something went down, the city manager's like, all right, person in front of trash, why did trash go down last quarter? So there's a very high level of the accountability. But it's taken, yeah. But it's taken them 15 years to build that culture. That doesn't happen overnight. So, other places that are using it as a budget tool tend to use it once a year. So in other words, they get it, and then they use it as part of their budgeting process, and then they realign. Others that are just kind of doing it as a well health physical, how are we doing? Typically do it about every 2 years. And so those are the general frequencies that probably 90% of our customers do.
I think we would want to be doing it at least annually. Yeah.
Well, my question would be, one of the reasons that we wanted to do it now, and we had hoped to have it earlier than now, so we'd have all these data before we sat down for strategic planning prior to the budget, but because of when we thought, hey, let's do that, there wasn't enough time to put it in place.
Right.
So is there any are there problems with particular times of the year when it comes to putting these surveys out? And if we're thinking that we're going to be sitting in this seat doing budget planning at this time next year, when ideally would we gather those data so that we could have all of the report, all of the drill down before we come here?
Yeah, I would probably set it up so that you have the data a couple months before you have it. So in other words, if your process starts in like January, February, you probably would do it in the fall, so that way it's ready for you first of next year. And usually, most organizations do 2 surveys before they really start, making trends. In other words, you don't know if you're going down or up right now, and usually it takes a couple historical points. So just like in your maintenance, had we not done a survey 15 years ago, you wouldn't notice that your maintenance ratings have doubled. So you've done a great job on infrastructure. You still have a ways to go. So a couple, yeah, I'd probably do it fourth quarter. If you're going to use it again next year as a budget tool, do it probably November, December timeframe, so that way it's ready for you in January.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is it typical to witness significant changes across the board in priorities in cities?
For the priorities, not as much so. You'll see satisfaction tends to be more variable. So in Olathe's case, traffic flow was the top issue for like 13 years. It's now the number 2 issue, but it didn't go anywhere, for a long, long time. I would doubt that your top priorities, at least overall, are going to change that much in the next year. But how well you are meeting expectations, part of it is if you're going to emphasize communication or you're going to try to enhance your customer service, you might start doing things and actually make things worse. And it's better to know earlier than later. Because I've seen a lot of organizations, they say, hey, we're going to make customer service our top priority, and they redo their way they do, and then suddenly the residents don't like it. Or they'll say, oh, our web page needs to be improved, so let's change the web page, and they make it worse. Good example is Tamarack, Florida. A lot of senior citizens live in that community, and they had all spent 5 years getting used to the city's web page. So the city decided, you know what, we need to update the web page. They changed it, made it better for younger people, but the senior citizens were unhappy with the change. And so part of it is they then knew, oh, we made a change that wasn't in the best interest. So they couldn't understand why the ratings went lower. But then when we looked at it by age group, people 60 and above had seen satisfaction levels drop 15%. Younger people were fine, and they liked the changes, but the community's more of a senior community, and that was a negative. So part of it is if you make changes, you make priorities this year, assessing, are they working? Are people observing them? Some communities, Olathe, just because I'm there, they built a new city hall. It took residents 2 years to realize that they had a new city hall in downtown Olathe. So the first year we did the survey, they're like, how does satisfaction go down 2% with the overall quality of city buildings and city hall? Because nobody noticed. It took people a couple years before, oh, there's our new city hall in downtown Olathe. So sometimes it takes a little time, and if you invest in something and you do the survey next fall or next winter, and people don't see a change or the results, you're probably not communicating effectively, or people aren't even aware of what you're doing. And that's an important part of your investments, is you just can't invest and not tell folks. You got to let them know what you're doing.
Townsend and then Murguia.
Just a quick one as a follow-up on the timing again. Seasonal fluctuations. If we do this, the next one earlier, and there's a timing difference in when we have done it from the last one, have you noticed in doing your surveys that could account for a change? Because if we're going to use this as our baseline, we want to have enough time to effect change. So I don't know if moving it up is going to work to our detriment in that. I agree, at least annually. But what about that?
Yeah, it's a good point. It doesn't change dramatically, but if you do your survey in the fall, typically street ratings are better than they are in the spring, because they've fallen apart. The snow trucks have torn up the roads, and that's fairly common. There's about a 3 to 4% difference in this region for folks who do their survey in the fall. And the reason we notice that, because we now are doing quarterly surveys, so we actually see the results fluctuate a little bit, but it's not a statistic. We're talking 2 or 3, maybe 4 percentage points, so it's not a dramatic difference, but you should be aware of those seasonal differences. And that's one of the things that we're starting to chart now with Olathe and Kansas City, Missouri, is what services are affected seasonally, so that way we can even do a seasonal adjustment, kind of like the Consumer Confidence Index and those sorts of things. But we don't know that yet, and so part of it is when you decide to do it next, it's really up to you. I wouldn't expect your priorities to change much, but if you do start rolling out some initiatives this year, by doing the survey, maybe I would wait till you've done a few things, because otherwise, if you don't do anything, probably aren't going to see much of a change in the results. But if you do make some differences or make some changes in your priorities, it's a good way to figure out, are you at least getting the word out? Like Olathe, they just opened up a community recreation. I'm familiar. I gave their presentation yesterday morning, so the numbers are still here. That's why. But they just opened a new community recreation center. Told everybody about it. No one's really even used it, but satisfaction with indoor recreation facilities are up 10% because the expectation is, hey, it's coming. And you should be really in the other piece that I'll just emphasize here is in your communication. I did the survey for a city of Columbia last fall, and I went to a meeting with their staff, and I asked them, they had a newsletter that went out to all the residents, and, they had communication, some of the ratings weren't where they wanted to be, and they couldn't figure out, why they weren't connecting. So I had them pull up what they were sending out to residents, and they had lots of good stories about, a rodeo here, employees had given something to a Christmas tree fund, but there wasn't one story in there about street maintenance, about police, about the top priorities. And so if you're going to communicate things to this community, the things to communicate are the things at the top priorities. You can spend all your time talking about things that are lower on the list, but if you're not communicating about what you're doing with streets, what you're doing with your, code enforcement, about your police services, those things at the top of the list, residents are going to get the sense that you're a little disconnected because they're going to look at publications, they're going to look at your websites, they're going to look at what you're talking about, and it's going to be like, they're talking about things that I don't care about. And so part of it is to make sure the message is, given that you have limited opportunities to impact people with communication, make sure the information that you send out is on target with what residents are concerned about. And if you don't do that, you're missing a big opportunity.
Mergia and then Philbrook.
So I'm not suggesting we do a quarterly survey, but I'm curious in Olathe, when they switched to that, what happened to their customer service rating?
Yeah, we haven't been doing it long enough to really assess that. In fact, the first thing I presented to their city council last Tuesday night. I presented to the employees. First thing, when are we going to get the results of the quarterly survey? Well, we're not quite, they're in the point, we don't know about the seasonal adjustments. And see, the way Olathe is doing, Direction Finder is our product, and so we started what you are doing now 15 years ago. We're actually redoing the product with Kansas City, Missouri, and Olathe. So these quarterly surveys, you're probably not in a position to do that yet because we haven't figured out the appropriate method to roll it out. Whereas this process, where we do once a year, every other year, we have a pretty good system to help our organizations that work for us use the information, roll it out. The quarterly thing is something that I would look for you maybe in a couple years or so. But just getting used to this data and getting staff equipped to deal with it, letting you use it as part of your decision-making process, that in of itself takes a little bit of time. But
what do you find with other cities that you do quarterly surveys with? What do you find happens with their customer service?
it depends on whether or not there's a system of accountability in place. I mean, that's what it comes down to. In other words, if it's okay that, no, is it part of their performance reviews? I mean, there's tough things that, at the end of the day, Olathe, to give you an example, this is how it goes. Yesterday, the city manager announced to employees that they all got $200 bonuses for the year. They have 3 targets on their annual survey that affect, there's $100 per employee if those 3 targets are met. They got 2 out of the 3. So at yesterday's meeting, they announced that every employee got a $200 bonus. And so it's tied to performance. And so those are the kind of things, your highest performing organizations link survey data to performance because that drives employees to be responsive to customers. But it's taken many, many years to change. Olathe used to be a good old boy culture as far as the way they made decisions. And so they've had to transform their
I'm glad
processes.
we don't have those problems.
So. Oh, I think there are probably 800 now. At one time, they were close to 1,000, I think, before the late 2000s hit. So
to extrapolate on some of the things you've told us, and maybe get out your crystal ball and help us with a vision of how to do and how to set up a timeline for us to do these? Because we've all hit on, do we really want to get to quarterly so we can be responsive? And if we intend to follow up and use this information as a commission, what do you see? Are we talking, I know you said maybe a year or 2 years out for quarterly or whatever. How do we determine if we're being responsive enough to up the game?
If I were to come back here next year and show this chart back to you about what your priorities and how satisfaction levels have changed, if you haven't moved the needle on anything, then you're not ready to go to quarterly surveys. If you're trying to make this decision, you've got to kind of get used to at least establishing high-level organizational priorities where there's at least some consensus around. Because what happens if you all are divided, then the community is going to be divided. And that's the big difference. High-performing organizations, I consistently see, have unified leadership on their big issues. They might disagree about other things. Olathe battled over their community recreation center for over a decade. They didn't finally get it till like a couple weeks ago, and it was on a couple council members' agendas when they got elected in the 90s. And by gosh, they weren't going to retire till they got a new community center. But they decided, you know what? We're going to let traffic flow be the issue. Even though it's not sexy, even though it's really undesirable, I didn't get elected on, hey, I'm going to make it easier to drive down Santa Fe Street in Olathe. But they put aside that to make the higher level issues. And so they eventually got their community recreation center, but those are the tough things. Really, it's how do you all work together? And if you all can, because you've got lots of different interests, you got lots of resources for which you're responsible for allocating, and if you end up saying, you know what, we're going to let everybody get their special issue, you'll never address these high issues countywide. That's just the reality. And this year I've worked for over 200 communities across the country, and what I find unique among the high performers is consensus among the leadership about their top priorities.
But there is consensus.
There is for your, I don't know really any of you, so I don't know.
Right there.
I'm just being candid with you today because I don't know how this commission functions. I'm gone. I don't even read the news. I don't know what's going on in Kansas City at all. I travel 200 days a year. Coming home like, wow, hey honey, how you doing? But so I don't know. I don't know for you all how you work as an organization, how your leadership works, how your staff. I'm here. I saw Lou a couple days ago for an hour, and I haven't been up here for 3 years. And so I'm just telling you, when I go from city to city or county to county, the one consistent thing I find is that their leadership, though they may have very different personal vested interests and have different reasons they were elected, they can come together on big issues and decide, you know what, I'm going to set aside my pet issue to make this happen. And if that happens, you can, exactly. But this is your residents are unified. I don't know about where you all, and that's part of the reason you're probably.
We're going to do this and not do what they say?
Well,
I don't know.
I go to a lot of places that I'm like, hey, here's your results. I come back the next year. What'll happen is if you don't respond, satisfaction will go down. I can guarantee it without a doubt. If you don't respond to these high-level issues that you see here that are on this chart, if you don't really come up with good strategies to address maintenance, police, code enforcement, and even parks, if you don't figure out what's your strategy and how you prioritize those issues, residents are going to feel like you're not responding to their needs. And so and you'll hear from the people who don't like the fact that you're spending more money in one of these areas than another. That's what you have to be prepared for. The reality is you're going to make tough decisions and people aren't going to be happy with those decisions. But you've got to take a look at what are the bigger pictures. And that's part of your process today, I think, is strategically what are you going to emphasize over the next couple of years. And you can do a lot of things by focusing on one area, but it's how do you package it. So like in Olathe, when they had their traffic flow issue, they talked about response times for police. They talked about response times for fire, and they talked about response times for ambulance. They looked at traffic enforcement, and they realized by stepping up traffic enforcement, people would stop driving like crazy maniacs through neighborhoods to avoid congestion because that affected safety. So the result of traffic flow is causing people to feel less safe about their neighborhoods. And for them, it wasn't the shootouts or whatever I heard a little bit ago. It was people driving 50 miles down a neighborhood street because they were tired of the congestion. And so they looked at how did the big issue impact many other service areas, and then they put out a message, our focus is this. And part of that is, what is your theme, and how do you tie in lots of different issues into a high-level vision, and then you make your priority for investments support what that vision or theme is. And that's the tough part, but that's, where you get in, get paid the huge dollars to serve the, I'm kidding, but that's the tough part.
All right.
This is great.
Any other questions or comments for the survey? One of the, yeah, Lou?
I'd like to give Chris and his firm just a special thanks. They worked with us on what I believe was an accelerated schedule. We decided to do this late in 2013. We didn't get really final drafts of questions to them to early January, and Chris, is certainly he's the lead in the firm. I think we were very fortunate to have his involvement and just appreciation of how they moved forward to meet the timeline for today.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. One of the things we need to discuss is if we're going to do one this fall, which sounds like we probably need to get on that track of doing it every fall so we have it for our spring strategic planning as we go into the budget. If we're going to get on that track, we're going to need to move forward with that. One of the questions that we'll need to talk with Lou about is if we want to do a survey that retains the same percentage points by district, increasing the cost of the survey county-wide so that we have that. But we need to just make sure we understand that cost and then get on track for this fall so we can start doing our annual fall survey for planning and for priority setting and for budgeting. And then as we've done that, then in a couple of years looking at quarterly. But I think these survey results align clearly with our priorities overall, but I think there are some adjustments we need to make. I think we need to make some adjustments to our current priorities to make sure we're funding them. And I agree with you, some of the priorities aren't that expensive. Customer service response is a lot less expensive than replacing streets. And I think that's big, and I think tying it to performance reviews with our staff, I think is terrific. I think that'd be a goal that I think we could work towards. But that and the communication piece, it's interesting how important that communication is, and we have cut back because of cost on our newsletter. But I also really think it's relevant what you put in that newsletter. Don't send out a newsletter about stuff people aren't interested in. Send out a newsletter that people, and not that we haven't, I'm not suggesting we have, but I'm saying really focusing our website, our newsletter on the top priorities of the community and communicate the heck out of that. And we don't do, we did a great job celebrating our new transit centers when we opened our new transit centers at both at 47th Street as well as at 7th Street. Did a great rollout on that. We ought to be publishing the heck out of every street we finish paving. Every park, all the park equipment we upgrade, all of the things that we do as a community that cost big money. We need to be celebrating as a community and letting our community know that we're investing. This is good. This is great information. Yeah, Mr. Walker.
A couple of things. One, and I haven't seen the complete survey, so with that in mind, and there may be questions in there, I would like to see in subsequent surveys questions regarding the relationship of the unified government and satisfaction or involvement with for example, the Board of Public Utilities, the Housing Authority. There are probably other third-party, quasi-related or funded agencies. Secondly, I know that we did not cover, and again, this was with the proviso that I haven't seen the complete breakdown, but in order that, let's call it commissioner satisfaction, is very high on the survey, I do not want the survey sent out without the final checkoff by the commission. And in my estimate, I never saw the survey before it went out. Now, maybe others did, and if you did, fine. Maybe I missed it, but as a proviso to my comments, I want to make sure that everybody sees it, signs off on it, and if there are questions that they want in it, that there is either a reason they can't go in it or they be included. So.
No, I totally agree with that, and I think in terms of having, now that we have a nice lead time in terms of getting this done, what I would ask, I would just ask, Lou, did you spearhead this? Mike did. I would just ask Mike to put together a calendar for us for this year so that we can get the survey questions to the commission and we can get a final draft of that to the commission before it would need to go out, and work backwards from your date in terms of when that fall survey would need to be completed, that we can have a calendar that we would have on it a discussion again about this survey, reviewing of the questions, a window of opportunity, a couple weeks, a week or two for the commission to submit additional questions, and then a discussion at a commission meeting when we would give the okay for the survey to move forward, and then we would have it. Does that sound like a fair process?
Certainly.
Okay. So let's get that calendar together, and then we can anticipate it. Let's also get the cost together, because I see a consensus, and I want to make sure that's true, that we want a statistical data, a higher number of responses, so that each commissioner could use in their district the results. Is that, am I hearing that? Is that a consensus, or?
For me, I just think we ought to see the full notebook before I want to see the full notebook, and I want to see the amount it's going to cost to get the increased sample size, because maybe the full notebook answers all of our questions, and the number's so big we don't want to pay that much for the bigger sample. Or maybe we say we want more information and that number's low enough we're willing to pay for it. So I just want to see before I decide.
Absolutely. Okay, so if we can get, but that's data, Mike, that we want back as well. What would be the cost for the additional sample size? And after we've had some time to review the survey results completely. But I'm looking forward to incorporating this into our regular operations for this commission. I think this is a step in the right direction. So thank you, Mike, for pulling this together on short notice. And thanks to the commission for authorizing it. I think it's moving in the right direction. And Chris, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You know, Your Honor, I might suggest that we take a break now.
Yep, I was just going to suggest that. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will be back here a little bit after 10 o'clock.